Yeah, welcome along. I'm Paul Jones. I'm a senior Android developer here at Sharesies, and the talk today I'm going to be giving is about navigation in Jetpack Compose and how to make sure that, especially when you're opening deep links, that those are always authenticated when they're required to be. So we'll be covering a few things in this talk. We're giving a sort of basic rundown of Jetpack Compose navigation. We'll be and then extending that to add deep links, and then how you might make sure that if a user's coming to your app from a deep link, make sure that they are always going to be authenticated. I was going to start with just a round of hands, or a show of hands, who in the apps that they're working on, either at work or in a personal project, is using Jetpack Compose. And keep your hand up if you're using Jetpack Compose navigation. And how many of you have some sort of like login or authentication system in those apps? Sweet, that's quite a few. So to a few of you, this will be sort of covering ground that you already know, but we'll just go over this anyway for anyone who hasn't used Jetpack Compose navigation before. This is, I've sort of created like a really basic sample app to keep referring back to over the course of the presentation. So you can see there's a login screen, there's a home screen, and then there's a content screen, which we'll be deep linking into later on. And the home and content screens, the user should only be able to see those if they have logged in. So starting a little bit with Jetpack Compose navigation, we want to define the routes that we'll be using today. So using the latest Compose navigation update, which added safe args, you can now just create routes like this. So a serializable object, home route, same for login and content. This example is not going to be using any sort of arguments or parameters for those screens, so they can just be objects. If you need arguments passed into those screens, you can use a data class instead. Setting up your nav host. So this is done inside the set content block of your onCreate. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You create a nav controller and you pass the nav host the start destination that you want. So for us, we want all of our users to be logged in to start with, so we're going to send them to the login route. And then to add your screens to your navigation graph, you just use the composable extension function as part of the nav graph builder. With the safe args, again, you can just use those type arguments there for home route and login route. And then inside the composable content block, you just pass the composable of the content that you want for each of those screens. This is the example for the home and the login routes, and we'll get to the content screen later, which will have some information about deep links. And then, so actually navigating, so you can see our home screen here has a button to open the content screen. The way we do that is just passing a callback into the home screen that just calls navcontroller.navigate, and you can just pass in the route straight into there. And a slightly more complicated example here. So with the login screen, once the login is successful, we want to navigate to the home route, but if we just did it without that extra bit there, what would happen is it would go to home route, and if the user pressed back, you would end up on the login screen again, which is not going to be an ideal result. So to get around that, we call pop up to, passing in the login route itself and inclusive true. And what that would do is remove, when the login route navigates to home route, it will remove itself from the backstack. And so you'll end up with a result where the home screen is the only screen there. Cool, so a little bit of an overview of what's going on at the moment. So as we defined before, our start destination for the nav host has been defined as a login route. And so when a user opens the app via like the launcher icon, they're going to get a backstack that just has the login route on it. When they click the login button on that screen, it will replace itself with the home route. And then when the user clicks open content on the home screen, the content route gets put on the top of the backstack And so that's the screen that is shown to users. And then heading back from the content route will take you to the home route again. Cool. So that was a bit of a basic overview of Compose navigation. Now we're going to talk about deep links. So deep links are super important for us at Sharesies. We send out a lot of marketing emails and notifications. I'm sure you're aware of that, some of you. And obviously we want to, we have a bunch of call to actions in there for users to, say, top up their wallet. And we don't want to send users into the start page of the app and for them to have to find their own way into the top up screen. So deep links is a solution for that. Deep links let you go directly into a screen in the app without making the user do that all themselves. How do we do that in Compose Nav? So this is the content route. I mentioned earlier that we'd get to this in the future. So pretty similar to what we were doing before. So we have a list, so composable, passing in the content route as the type, and then we have the content screen composable down there with a callback to navigate up and go back to the home screen. The only difference here is that you can see we're passing in a list of deep links into the composable function there. A little bit complicated, there's a few bits going on there, but the main thing there is the URI pattern. So that is the specific URL that we want, if the Android system, if another app deep links to that particular URL, we want our app to open to the content screen. The other thing you have to do to support deep links is add this intent filter into your Android manifest. And this will mean that your app advertises outside of your app to the Android system that you can support particular, the host and the scheme there. So anything that's on example.com and is an HTTPS, the system will try and open it in your app if you've set up the deep link before. The other thing to note on this screen or for this code is that obviously I don't own example.com. If you're doing this in a production app and you want to do this with your own site, you'll need to create a well-known assets link file, host it on your website, and then add a auto-verify true tag into that intent filter. And that's just so that Android verifies that you actually own the domain that you're trying to open an app with. Because otherwise some random hacker could create an app which just collects every URL and opens their app instead. Cool. And then testing it, you can do it via ADB shell. So you can see we're creating an intent with an action of view with a link to this example.com/content. And as I said before, I don't own example.com. So to make sure that the Android system tries to open my app, you have to stick the com.example.app there as your package name. You can also do this in Android Studio with the launch configuration. Cool, so let's try that out. We run that command and great, we get the content screen. Wait, where's the login screen? How's the user managed to get here without having to log in? And why when I press back, do I then get the login screen? So that brings us to the, I guess the main reason I wanted to do this talk in the first place, which is around authenticating your deep links. So let's have a look at what's actually going on in the backstack when you've deep linked into the content screen. The navigation library automatically tries to create a backstack for you that is trying to replicate the journey that a user would have taken in your app to get to that specific screen. And it does that by using the start destination of the nav host and any nested graphs that you've created inside of your nav host. So for us, that is the login route, because that's the start destination that we defined in the nav host. And then we've opened straight into the content route. So that's now the screen that's on top of the backstack. And when we head back from the content route, we're going to go back to the login screen. So how could we look at fixing this? I think there are a couple of options that I'm suggesting here aren't necessarily bad, and they would work for some scenarios. They just didn't work for what we wanted to do. So what could we do? We could add authentication logic to every screen that's going to be opened by a deep link. But that makes a lot of duplicate code if you've got quite a few screens that can be deep linked to. And when you're adding a new deep link, there's always a possibility that you forget to add that authentication code to a new route. We could check for intents in the main activity and navigate to login if required. But what if you'd have screens that don't need authentication? You're going to have to then add a check in the main activity with like a list of routes that don't need to be authenticated and check against that. And because of the way that the Android X navigation works with deep links, though the deep link screen will actually already be open by the time that you're doing that. So our solution. We adapted a mindset that any screen on our app could be deep linked to. We don't know what like the marketing emails are going to want to link to in the future, so we don't want to have to go back and keep adding authentication to every new screen that we add a deep link into. So every screen has to be able to show login if required. And the approach to this was the screens that require a user to be logged in, we called authenticated. And the ones that didn't need a user to be logged in, we called unauthenticated. E.g. login, obviously you don't need to be logged in to view the login screen, and sign up. And we've got a few others as well. And our solution is called Authenticated Composable. Now, we didn't come up with this ourselves. We spent quite a while hunting around for a solution that would work for us, and eventually stumbled across a couple of threads in the Android study group Slack, if anyone's part of that, where a few people had raised similar issues and had replies from people like Ian Lake, who's a developer at Android. And this was one of the methods that he suggested. So what does it look like? So we start off by creating a sealed interface we call authentication state. And this basically lists every state that could exist within our authentication. So for this pretty simple starter app, sample app, we have loading. So that's the state that's before it's decided whether you're logged in or not. And then we have not logged in and logged in. For us, because we persist like a user's login state across app launches, and then ask people to re-authenticate with a fingerprint or a PIN, we have some other ones, like if they're authenticated or need to do the fingerprint again. And a little bit more stuff before we get to Authenticated Composable itself. So we created an authentication view model. This takes in a login repository. Obviously, in this sort of sample app, all that does is expose a flow of Boolean. Are you logged in or not? In real life, that's probably going to be a little bit more complicated. It's also important that this is a singleton. So in this sample, we're using HILT, but whatever DI solution you have, because you need to make sure that this view model is the same one throughout the entire app. Cool. So basically what this view model does is take the flow of booleans from the login repository and map it into those authentication states that we saw before. So here, again, it's pretty simple. Maps the flow, or maps the boolean into either authentication state logged in or not logged in, basically, if it's true or false. And the state in is pretty important as well. So while the view model will persist across the lifecycle of your app, the flow itself will stop if all of its consumers disappear. So that sharing it started.lazily means that this flow will keep running or stay active until the view model is destroyed. And by doing that, it just means that new consumers of that flow won't have to keep asking for a new value from login repository, because by creating a state flow, it caches the last value that was emitted. And so new consumers will get that last value rather than having to go and get a new one if they don't need to. Sweet. So let's actually have a look at Authenticated Composable itself. This is a wrapper around the composable function that we saw before. It takes in all of the same parameters and arguments that composable itself does, passes most of them just straight through, other than the content parameter. We also add the nav controller as an argument in order to do some navigation, which we'll get to in a second. And the code in here is pretty simple. We create a HILT view model, an authentication view model, and then we get the state by the usual means of getting a view model state in Jetpack Compose. And we have to define an initial value again here as well, which is loading. And then when it comes to the content, so we do a when statement around that authentication state value. So we had three different values of authentication state. The first one being loading, which is displaying a loading state. That could be a spinner or whatever loading state that you have in your app. Not logged in. So in this case, we want to take people to the login screen. So again, pretty simple, launched effect on authentication state, and we'll just call nav controller navigate to the login route. And then finally, if the user is logged in, we'll just display the content. So yeah, that one's pretty simple. And that's the same content that you pass into the usual composable function. So what does it actually mean in terms of replacing code that we had showed before? So in the now post, we can now actually set the start and destination to be the home route. The home route will also be authenticated, so if that needs authentication, it will navigate to the login route itself. When we add the home route to the navigation graph, we're just replacing composable with authenticated composable here, and we just need to pass in the nav controller as well. Everything else remains the same. Login route, as I said earlier, the login route, you don't need to be logged in to see the login screen, so that all remains the same. The only difference is here is because the login screen can be opened from anywhere in the app now, we don't want to navigate from the login screen to the home screen. We want to just remove the login screen from the backstack. So I think I've got an example here. Yeah. So with our deep link example here, so we've deep linked into the content screen again. The authenticated composable for content route will then take you to the login route. And once you've completed login, using the pop backstack, it will remove everything on the backstack up to and including itself. So it'll remove itself and we'll go back to the content route rather than navigating to home like we were doing before. And the content route, again, pretty simple. We're just replacing composable with authenticated composable and adding the nav controller there as a argument. If you didn't want to pass the nav controller down, you could pass callbacks for navigation. We're just using the nav controller for simplicity because we've got more than just navigate to login inside of ours. Cool. So a few benefits of this approach. As you just saw, it's really easy to swap out composable for authenticated composable. You just have to add the nav controller as a parameter. It allows us to set the start destination as home route. So previously we actually had we were doing a if statement on whether the user needed to re-authenticate or not as our start destination. So it could be one of two things. So we, in the Sharesies app, because the user can click to remember them, so they don't need to do fingerprint auth every time. And so we were like using a I've forgotten the term for it right now. But yeah, we can just set it as home route, and the login route won't need to be shown at all if it's not needed. If you have some sort of authentication timeout like we do, so we have a 5-minute background auth if you've got fingerprint or PIN set as your authentication method. All that 5-minute timeout needs to do is emit or tell the login repository you're now logged out, and that will flow down from the login repository to the authenticated composable for the screen that you're currently on, and that screen will automatically redirect you to re-authenticate or log in again without having to do any navigation. Okay. Something that we've done, so I mentioned earlier for one of the other possible solutions I mentioned was forgetting to add this sort of authentication check. So we've actually created an unauthenticated composable that literally just wraps composable and does nothing else. And that means that we have to make a conscious decision for every screen that we create. Do we use authenticated composable or unauthenticated? We need better names. We haven't done this bit, but you could also add a lint rule to stop the usage of composable itself if you wanted to do that. Sweet. I don't know if I want to do a demo. Does anyone want to see a demo?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Hopefully that is visible for everyone. I just made this more centered. Sweet. So this is using just composable. So this was the example that we saw at the very start of the presentation. So when the app loads, we have the start destination of the login screen. And so when you log in, it will take you to the home screen, and you can from there can open content. But what happens if we try and deep link straight into content? And I'll just close this one, just so you can see it open fresh. So we deep link straight into content, and yeah, so we don't get the login screen. And when we hit back from here, now the login screen is going to open, we hit login, and then we see the home screen. So if I switch these over, so we're now using authenticated composable. And we'll see what that looks like. So this is running the app from scratch. Let's do it again. So this is with the home route being the start destination. So you can see it immediately opens the login screen without ever showing the home screen first. And we click login, login's removed in the backstack, and we're now at the home screen. Something I mentioned in the benefits at the end was you can just call login repository to be logged out. So if we just click this button here, the authenticated composable will just get a new update of that flow and just navigate to login again. And if we try deep linking in, we get the login screen, then we get the content screen, and if you hit back here, you'll be at the home screen. Cool, that's it. If you've got any questions, we can do them now or just approach me afterwards. There you go, that's it. There you go, Daniel. Does it let you turn your mic on?
I think it does. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question. It's around the URIs. I'm assuming you obviously in Sharesies marketing controls that. You probably have them do some new URIs go into certain parts of the application. What happens if, for example, there is a URI that is not known by the application? Do you guys show some sort of like, hey, we don't recognize this URI, some sort of landing page that would say, we don't know what you're doing, but sorry, try again? Or do you sort of have like a problem in that case where you don't recognize the URI in a previous version of the app, but in the newest one, you do have that URI, and then you tell them, hey, we recognize that this URI is not available in this version of the app, but go and update your app that will have this screen. What's sort of your approach in that case?
So at the moment, so we did used to catch all URLs that started with app.sharesies.com. We had to turn that off for a particular feature launch that we didn't want redirecting into the app. It's a long story. So we catch pretty much everything, but any URLs that aren't caught by our app will just open in browser. So we're trying to minimize those. But yeah, so basically we catch most stuff that starts with app.sharesies.com as well as our Firebase dynamic link URL as well. So we do deep linking for both of those hosts. Yeah, so basically to answer your question, no, we don't have a generic catch-all for any URL at the moment.
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
Cool. So my understanding is that Sharesies is a hybrid app, and there are still some web screens within the app, right?
There's quite a few.
There's quite a few, yeah. How do you handle that with this pattern? Because if you have to statically declare whether a screen is authenticated or unauthenticated, how do you handle that, like a generic web view composable? Or do you handle it like each web view screen uniquely?
So we have a web wrapper route. What's the most generic way I can reply to this? We have two different web wrapper routes depending on the URL. So we do expose a few web URLs in particular that will then be caught by the native screen and then open a web view like that. Otherwise, the sort of generic way of opening a URL that does get caught by what Daniel was talking about, we just open a web view screen and let the web view sort it out, the web app. So we have a authenticated web wrapper and an unauthenticated web wrapper, which will basically either provide the cookie to the web view or not. And then I think, off the top of my head, basically everything gets treated as if it's authenticated unless we've whitelisted it not to be. And it'll open in an unauthenticated web view. We don't have too many screens which don't require you to log in, that's a problem. But yeah, that's just something we have to deal with while we're still hybrid, and which will be for the foreseeable future. Any more questions from anyone? You can also feel free to approach me afterwards if you want to see any of the code or ask any further questions. But you probably all want pizza? Is it pizza?
Pizza is here in like 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
What's the question?
Yeah? Do you want the mic?
It's very simple. What's happening if you press
online, but
Oh.
online, yeah.
I think the mic's there, so may or may not.
First of all, is it on? I never use the mic.
Is it green?
Hi. Yeah. First, thank you for the presentation. That was really good. So, my question, like, I've been using Isaac. Where is Isaac? No. Until Arrow navigation for quite a while. So, what's happening if you press back on the login screen?
From I start this again. Hang on, I'll share this online so.
No, it's missing action. He actually reminded me.
You might have found something that I didn't put into the talk. So it will get into a weird loop in this situation. In the Sharesies app, it doesn't do this. So you have found the flaw in this demo app, which is I didn't handle that case. In the Sharesies app, if you hit back on the login screen, we just close the app. So, yeah.
So you intercept it and you close it.
Yeah, so we use a back
Backhand.
handler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, I didn't do that in this app. Yeah. And I'm not going to live code that now.
Sorry for that.
Cool. So no further questions. I think we'll wrap that up there. And thanks for tuning in online, everyone.